Thank you
Oh,
so
yeah.
much. It's good to have it recorded for the ones that
Could not
probably,
attend.
yeah, could not attend. I also must say that I am guilty that sometimes I register the webinars to watch it later. So that's, I think, something that everybody has learned to do. So, first of all, thank you for joining us, especially the people live, but also those that will watch the webinar in replay. I want to just, today, first of all, we're going to speak about, this title that Henry was so good to find. I think he really got the question very, very deeply and very strong. So we have this problem now that most of the problems that we address, not just in the public sector, but also in the private sector, as we will see during the conversation, are normally problems that outgrow and I would say involve multiple organizational players and span across multiple entities. So that's what we're going to discuss quickly today. With me, I'm Simone. I am CEO of Boundaryless. Created the platform design toolkit many years ago now, and now continue to create open source tools. We're going to talk about in a minute. Lucia, I don't know if you want to jump in just to introduce yourself quickly.
Yes, thank you. So my name is Lucia Hernandez. I am from Barcelona, from Spain, and I collaborate with Simone for a long time, working always around the platform economy and lately introducing also regenerative design or regeneration into these platform strategies, ecosystem strategies in order to bring life to the ecosystems where we are part of, and we are operating, basically, helping organizations in general to do that. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, so very quickly, Boundaryless, our story is dating back to 2000 and early 2010. In the last few years, more than a decade, we have been working at the edge of platforms and ecosystems thinking. In the last 5-ish years, we are moved more strongly towards organizational development because we realized that it's not just about products and experiences, but you also need to organize in a certain way to kind of thrive in the ecosystem age. We have quite a unique point of view. We try to connect organizations and products and markets in a very continuous and adaptable way. Two of our most used open source toolkits are available both in Creative Commons, Platform Design Toolkit, and the Trio Toolkit. You can check it out on the website. They are very much about designing both your strategies and your organization. They can be used autonomously. The license is open source, and there are also very comprehensive guides on the website that you can download, and you can do your own stuff. We normally work as sparring partners with companies, public bodies, institutions. We do a lot of visual facilitated co-creation, and we support a network of practitioners more than consumers of our work, right? So it's really been a pleasure to work with companies and organizations all over the last 10, 15 years, and most of the tools that you see online are fruits of this collaboration. So we learned with companies and organizations, and we brought back everything into the commons. So that's what we do. Context. So first of all, as I said before, what is the context we are living? The world has essentially, moved more decisively into complex problems. So this is something we can see, we can perceive, we can sense, and the traditional, let's say, approach where single institutions create solutions no longer, suffice to support, to respond to these kind of challenges. And this is not just, of course, about public services, but if we look into public services, we see that public services remain largely fragmented, also as an expression of the organizational fragmentation that exists in the institutional space. Typically, our institutions have evolved more as an effect of protecting themselves from disruption and change. So they have been devoting often the last years to protect their budgets or the scope of interest and scope of roles in the society. So public services are fragmented. All this integration burden is shifting to the users. So as a user of public services or social and services more in general, you will certainly have experienced this frustration of having to put the pieces together, complement incomplete services with other elements, maybe from the private sector, and essentially, because these systemic challenges are really much cut across organizational borders. This is not just a public systems or public service bodies problem, it's also a business problem. And increasingly in the last few years, businesses have been largely moving into this idea of integrations, compatibility, open standards, sometimes closed standards, networks, platforms. And there is an increasing understanding that customers in the ecosystem have what once somebody in our podcast called a joint customer need. So essentially, as a provider of a product or a service or a solution in the market, increasingly we are aware that the services we provide are serving customer needs that span across services, across players, across providers. As an effect of this, what we have seen in the last few years is that most of especially the B2B space, but also in the B2C space, most of the players that provide the digital and non-digital services complement them with what we normally call app marketplaces or service marketplaces. So a lot of the times that they serve the customer, they complement their core products with third-party ecosystems that can really, let's say, enrich the experience of the customer and make it so that the customer can have a full response to the depth of his or her problems. As a result, essentially, in a market where there's been a lot of modularity and fragmentation and so on, concepts like optionality or product centricity, modularity have become first class citizens of the organizational context. And therefore, this meta message, which is asking, organizations for breaking down into smaller pieces, giving more autonomy, more optionality, more diversity, is requiring the organization to be organized in a different way. So what we have seen emerging in the context, especially in the context of business, is that organizations have fragmented into pieces, have unbundled into smaller pieces, and have largely empowered teams and units to create their own stuff in a more or less coherent way. So we have witnessed essentially the evolution from the functional organization, which is something we have used to be. We are more used maybe from the last century. So the idea that an organization is divided into silos. We have we went through the age of the matrix organization. That was a first, I would say, acknowledgement that you cannot really accomplish anything, meaningful and impactful by splitting work into containers, And so we had these matrix organizations. And lastly, in the last few years, what we have seen is largely a transition towards these networked platform organization models where you have a lot of product units. Maybe they use shared services, but there's a lot of autonomy more in general. Some organizations that are pioneering these systems are achieving incredible results. So, for example, here is the example from Moderna. Actually, the company is called Flagship Pioneering. It's a biotechnology company that is famous for having created one of the COVID vaccines. And they have this continuous incubation process where they incubate new companies all the times. They call them proto-cos, and then they let them into growing into what they call growth cos. So essentially, the companies, to some extent, are becoming a venture incubator, right? So it's becoming a system that spins out new elements, new pieces all the time. More companies have been doing this. Probably the most famous is Haier Group, the Chinese company that is well known for its organizational model called the Rendan Hei, which is also incidentally the inspiration and collaboration, because we collaborated directly with Haier in the creation of our trio organization model, the platform organization model that Boundaryless have developed. But it's generally, I would say, a trend that has been witnessed across the board in organizations. So even Amazon pretty much works this way. They have this idea of what they call single-threaded leadership. So it's really about companies that fragment into smaller pieces so that they can create more portfolio offerings, right? More like diverse set of solutions that can be as complex as the world, basically, right? So the idea is really, since the world is becoming complex, how do you cope with that? And in basic complexity science terms, you have to be on par as an organization with the complexity of the market or the world to really, let's say, be able to thrive in complexity. So, of course, this is something that is not happening just into the public sector, the private sector, right? This is a picture from us in, I think it was 2019, where we have been hired by the UN to the UNDP in this case to experiment ways for embracing platform thinking as a particular approach to policymaking. So we are pretty used to think about policies as static regulations, but most of the times, public sector, development sector, social sector also spends a lot of money in creating active services, right? So the idea of platforms has been used quite a lot in the past in platformizing public services. So in a way that similar to how Airbnb has platformized, let's say, the hospitality services, or Uber has platformized mobility, right? But what we are seeing now is that we are moving from a perspective of, okay, there is this service like, I don't know, education or caregiving. How do we platformize it so that we can maybe leverage on the capability of the ecosystem and deliver more than what we would deliver if the public servants were alone in delivering the services, into more of a perspective of how do we orchestrate the constellation of actors that exist already in society and are trying to achieve their own objectives in a complex system of interaction, right? So it's less about the public service maybe coming into the system and platformizing to increase impact, and more like a posture where we recognize that the complexity of the ecosystem is already working, is already trying to achieve their own objectives. And maybe what's needed is an acupunctural approach that can maybe add what's lacking or play some roles that maybe nobody in the market is playing or in society, right? This approach has been pioneered by some of our friends at UNDP, for example. These are the most, probably UNDP is the most advanced, development-related organization. It's not really a public body, but it's involved in the same problems. And it's testing a lot of systems approaches and portfolio-based approaches to change. This is to say that it's not just something that works in business, right? But at the same time, businesses have been pioneering some of these practices for some years now, especially the ones that have collaborated with Boundaryless. And essentially, we have used an approach that we call, or not, rather not us, but generally is called a reverse Conway or inverse Conway maneuver. So what do you do actually do? So Mel Conway, in the end of the 60s, he was among the first that came out with this idea, empirical, let's say, idea that as an organization, you ship your org chart essentially, right? So if your org chart is made in a certain way, the products and the services you're going to deliver to the market kind of reflect the organizational structure that you have. So if we ask this question from the perspective of regional, local, or national public bodies or social enterprise or social systems, let's say more in general, social context. What does it mean? So it means that if we really want to deliver systemic outcomes, what we have to start to do is to actually think in systems and think in modeling these systems intentionally so that we can improve the way they work together in a systemic manner. So for this reason, we created the portfolio map canvas, which is one of the largest additions to our methodology. It puts together some pre-existing, let's say, approaches like word lay mapping or domain-driven design. So approaches that have been surfacing in the software development space or in general in the socio-technical modeling space. And it helps you map the system from a visual perspective and map, let's say, the interaction between the players in the system, what are their customer needs, and how the different value proposition and players that exist in the system and the capabilities that exist are stacked up to deliver a certain customer solution to a customer need. It's a very visual tool. We have been using it all the time with startups, scale-ups, large companies, large conglomerates. And you can imagine that, for example, when you work with a large company doing, I don't know, for example, one of our customers is doing mobility services, right? So they're doing a lot of stuff related to how, players like corporates ship materials or people move, parking spaces work. So this is a little bit of a context that sits, let's say, in the middle between what's public, what's private, because a lot of these things have a mixed footprint, for example, right? And so in their work, they have been having to collaborate with so many players in the ecosystem, which is essentially the same thing that happens in public systems. So if you start representing these systems in a way that you can see how all these customer needs exist, how the capabilities that exist in the market interact and collaborate to deliver a solution to the user problem, you can start to understand that maybe sometimes there are pieces that are lacking. So, for example, you can expose inefficiencies, you can reveal if there are some crazy dependencies that are stalling a whole ecosystem innovation process. You can guide your investments into restructuring a certain piece or moving one piece from one side to another, so potentially evolving one piece in a certain manner. So let me make a couple more references and examples. So essentially, applying these in the public service sector, it would really uncover that to improve public services, sometimes you don't always require building new capabilities. Maybe it's just a matter of recognizing the capabilities that exist in the system, recognize that maybe some of these capabilities lack enabling context, or enabling services, or maybe languages that are needed for them to collaborate, or interfaces, or maybe the user is just one block away, one capability away from getting a solution to her problem, because maybe nobody in the market has shown up yet to play a very crucial role in a full stack of value that is needed to generate a solution for a problem. So you can be really acupunctural in how you unlock the system and make it work in a new way. There are some interesting examples as well. So, for example, if you think about what the Indian government has been doing, and we are big fans because We believe that their work on digital infrastructures has been really pioneering. So, for example, with ONDC, they have solved largely, existing problem in India, which was, there was a lot of capabilities to deliver commerce on the last mile from small businesses, but they lacked the structural infrastructure, the actual infrastructure to connect the pieces together. And also they created this ONDC network, which is an open national network for direct commerce. And they essentially, for digital commerce, sorry, and they suddenly enable a lot of potential from the very texture of social commerce in India, which was incredibly powerful. And it's thriving, with this new capability, So basically the ONDC connects providers of products with developers of applications. So you kind of have a public Amazon that is being developed, largely thanks to this open network infrastructure that they created. So imagine what would potentially generate if networks like this are created in healthcare or in mobility, and indeed, some of the experiences, or in agriculture, maybe some experiences are emerging across the world. So traditionally, in organizations, when you unbundle a system into smaller pieces and try to create more portfolio initiatives, the metric is always the profit and loss. So what is that dictates if one of the nodes in the network is supposed to exist or not is P&L. So typically, if there is a piece in the system, a node in the system that is lacking, this will generate a business model for this node to exist and show up and create and solve this market gap, right? In public ecosystems, we may have different metrics. So we may have to discover essentially new ways to finance or create incentives and forcing functions for nodes to emerge in the network that maybe is not purely P&L. At Boundaryless, we have been doing some experiments in the past and some research, and we have realized that one of the, of course, we know that some mechanism exists, for example, related to credits, carbon credits, everybody knows that. But these credit mechanisms sometimes are a bit tricky and can be tricked as well. So it can be, for example, used to maybe you generate an externality somewhere and then somebody else is going to pay the cost, because there is this market of credits. But essentially, the interesting point, when you have a social system that needs to achieve a certain outcome, we have seen that it's very promising sometimes to make a closed loop system and allow in this closed loop the definition of value to essentially happen inside the system. So what happens is that normally when you have a closed system, for example, there are dynamics such as that the recipient of the system can be, on the other hand, the investors in the system, right? Because, for example, maybe you can have second order effects in the system that nobody else would pay for, except for the people that are actually part of the system. So, for example, you could have, I don't know, so you could solve a real estate issue or a housing issue in a particular city by creating positive impacts on the city texture, let's say, on the city, regenerative impacts on the city texture, that only the people that live in the city can invest into for. And in this case, it would be also something that they can even not just, perceive in terms of value, but they can even monetize, because generally speaking, a local regeneration project could improve the price of the real estate. So, for example. So there are some experiments being done, but in general, the idea is that we have to experiment, and some experiments, some ideas that we are researching at the moment would be, for example, to use tokens that could be funded through short loop investors, so investors that are involved in the systems themselves. So it could be, for example, that in a city or in a town, you can use part of the taxation to fund regenerative impacts and create, for example, tax discounts or other type of forcing functions that make some market failures less of a failure and make it more easy for players to show up. But more in general, I would say that whenever you have somebody that is facilitating a systemic representation, like the one that you can do with the portfolio map, if you see the system and you see how pieces are lacking, how dependencies are blocking innovation, then public bodies, associations, public-private synergistic initiatives can actually fund and create and generate these pieces. And sometimes it's not even a capability that costs so much money to build. Sometimes it can be a standard, it can be a language, it can be an enabling commons, like a property that really unlocks the value creation where there is a hole in the system. So it's really important that we see the system and we intentionally co-create the strategy of the system as a system itself. So we cannot design as participation, as somebody used to say. So practically speaking, we suggest that whenever there is a systemic challenge where public and private players are involved, mapping cross-institutional ecosystems of needs is the first step. Identifying lacking capabilities, the layers that are lacking, how these dependencies are blocking innovation. Piloting projects is always a big, a very important approach. And then, after the pilots, you can scale up the investments on infrastructure. Of course, these tools that we have created, which are completely open source, can be used to facilitate these strategic sessions. We have been doing a lot of work with large companies and creating, strategic processes, playbooks, and pilots that have delivered, important business results. But why not doing it for public and social systems? We are really eager to experiment for whoever wants to jump in. Of course, we do other activities. You can check out our website. We do research. So if you are interested in research, you can reach out, we can experiment. There are white papers and webinars and podcasts that you can look into in our website. And these are some of the customers that have been working with us in the past. And if you want to reach out, you can write to hello@boundaryless.io. We are here to help and to collaborate, and especially if we're talking about forward-thinking public bodies or foundations or players that want to experiment this approach to solving these complex issues. Even companies, right? Because we are seeing increasingly that companies acknowledge that they're part of a system, right? So increasingly the work we do with companies includes mapping systemic embeddings, right? So not just, we don't just map the customer needs, we also map, whatever is happening around the company and the systems the companies are part of. So that's a very important thing that I also wanted to say, so it's really about visualizing the systems sometimes. So thank you so much. Now we are available, of course, for a few minutes more for questions, and happy to answer and to engage with you. Thank you for your attention so far.
Yeah, well, thank you for this very interesting webinar and what you told us, and I've written down some notes. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. So, but also the other audience, I see that Victor Sluiter has a question. Maybe you can unlock your microphone out from yourself, but he asked from a bit meta. He says, okay, but what is your experience with open sourcing your method, because you do that, and also with regards to in needing to give support? Maybe you can reflect on that, Victor. What do you mean exactly?
Yeah, asking for a friend. No, it's, I'm working at a research group, and I think it's very interesting to share things in as open source. But question is always, what do you do with open source and support? So when you open source, I think you charge then for support if people have questions about it. But I was just thinking about, like, why did you choose to open source, and how does that work out for you, just in general?
I mean, I don't know, maybe Lucia, you can add, but I think this is more of more of a practical question on boundaryless. Well, I think we do this more for a perspective of it's not just a utilitaristic approach. I think I always say that lots of our work was based on open source. So given that lots of the work we have been using, it was open source. So we at the start we were even forced to share it, right? Because like our licenses, they include a viral clause. So if you modify, for example, our tools, you have to release them in Creative Commons as well. But also we did it for a bit of an ideological approach, right? We wanted this to be in the commons, right? Because we were coming from this space, and I think we wanted to be to give back to the commons. From a more practical perspective, this has been quite good for us in general because our work has reached more than 100,000 people all over the world, and they've been using it to do their own stuff. And I think if it wasn't open source, we would probably have had like a hundred, 100 of the impacts, or maybe less than that of the impact that we actually had in the world. And our work has been so foundational to platform thinking because it was open source. And of course, we have been monetizing the services. We have been able to work with fantastic companies, and hopefully we will be able to work with some public bodies or social enterprises or foundations in this new research we are doing.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Simone. Indeed, it's always because it's one of your models is also your closed loop system, yeah, and regenerating, and that's my link, because I did three remarks. That is, one is the integration burden is going to the user, and I like that one, yeah, okay, because that's, as a user, I experienced that as a user of healthcare, as a user of energy, yeah, I experienced that. So I have to do all kinds of things to cope with the sunshine, those kind of things, and yeah. So that's interesting. But also, then you say how to orchestrate it then. And as a single person, I cannot do it. But if you are going into a society, and for example, I'm part of an energy society, yeah, of 250 users put together and say, okay, we are now an energy company, and with a lot of solar panels. So yeah, but then still we lack some capabilities, as you say. But the third one is very interesting, I think, is the closed loop system. Yeah, and maybe you can reflect on that. There's one initiative called Local for Local. Yeah, that is that you can say we want to have a micro energy system within the community, within the village, where energy generation, of course, consumption, but also batteries, yeah, and transport are combined. Because at this moment it's extremely fragmented, all the providers. So maybe you can reflect on how could you, let's say, approach such a local energy provisioning, also then decoupling from the energy market. Maybe you have a thought on that.
I don't know, Lucia. I don't know if you want to jump in. You tell me. There is also some
Please go.
some experiment in Spain, in Barcelona, which are quite interesting, I think, on this. I mean, personally, I think that energy is the easiest market where you can do something like a closed loop system, because the investments needed for creating these production capabilities, like, for example, a solar energy, how can I say it? A solar,
Panels,
yeah. So yeah, I mean a solar. How can I say in English? a power production unit, a solar power production unit, it's easy, because the cost, they have a very long life, the depreciation, if people look at the blog, there is a blog post in our website that I maybe can share. But essentially, when you have all this control on the dynamics of the system, it's very easy to identify how much, for example, investors can put and how much they can get in terms of value, right? So in this case, energy, right? If you want to shift into something like agriculture or care, for example, the system is much more difficult, right? Because especially, let's think about social care. Social care is a much more complex system. You need to have humans in the loop, right? So it's much more difficult to understand how much the production cost, and so that's where having maybe a public player in the system, which can maybe ensure that one piece of the major system is granted and it's run with funding, for example, can open up for closed loop, closing the loops on smaller pieces. For example, you can have, elderly care community that works because there is a infrastructure that grants the basics, right? So you can have this more closed loop dynamics in a smaller context.
Yeah.
Lucia?
Yeah, I wanted to add, regarding this idea of the closing loops, because Marie, it was also asking if we have other examples on that, no? So Simone said that we have in Barcelona, in Catalonia, in the area, there is a project that is called Som Energia, that is a cooperative for energy. And this is like a group of people sharing energy, collecting and sharing energy in the cooperative, in the community, right? And regarding to for example, in the case of care and elderly case, there are also a project in Barcelona that is really interesting, but because it's promoted by the city council, and is how to connect elder people with 3 people at least. That is, for example, the pharmacy one, the one of the supermarket, and the family, of course, and so on. And they give them like a tablet in order to, with a super easy user experience, in order to connect with these 3 people that they have around, just to be connected and to also, for support, and if they have any problem or if they need something, wherever, no? So this could be also like this closed loop that you can organize. And the other idea that came to my mind, it was about, so it depends on how it's organized, right? So we are talking a lot of, so if we think about care is, as Simone said, super complex. We are facing more complexity, more and more, because there are more interactions, because technology, because there are a lot of things, no, that are doing that are giving more complexity to the life that we live, basically. And so there is this idea of maybe instead of thinking about care like a system or like a sector, trying to move to the idea of a place that it means like a boundary, something that could have a boundary, like a territory, and you can create there the services that this boundary or this place needs in order to have everything, no? So you know that, for example, in the case, there is a conversation around bioregions, no? There is this idea of, or the idea of in Paris, for example, there is this idea of the 15 minutes walk, no? So this is a project inside Paris that the idea is that you have everything in 15 minutes, no? You don't need to go farther than that in order to have everything, your work, the school, whatever, no? So there is this conversation about bioregions that is about the same, but in 45 minutes. So you have everything in 45 minutes. So I say that because I think that is important. This is an idea like still like building on that idea. But I think that we are going to change from thinking about industries and sectors to thinking about territories where everything is inside. this territory, no? And there is care, there is health, there is services of all types. There is the school, the education, wherever, no? Whatever is gonna be there in order to, basically to have close the cover the needs that you have, no? And there is the ideal space for creation of these closed loops, an economic system that is based on the place and on the people and on the whatever, no, the culture, the gastronomy, the needs, and everything that is in that place. So I think that we are going to see more and more this kind of thinking.
Yeah. There's a question from Marie. Says, okay, about this closed loop system. You mentioned tokens, and by the way, I think then of Kanban in companies. Could be a little bit the same, maybe the same thing. But so tokens in closed loop system. Can you have concrete samples?
I mean, unfortunately, it's not easy to give concrete example because these are very pioneering ideas. What we have seen so far is that the use of tokens have been largely used in climate-related regenerative networks, like, I don't know, Climate DAO or Toucan or this kind of things, right? So essentially, essentially there are mechanisms for creating these tokens that are attached to the positive outcomes that are generated. But largely, the projects that have been done so far have always tried to be relatively disconnected from the local, right? So, for example, I don't know, plastic bank rewards, solar coin, Toucan. So all these projects have created these tokens with the idea to create a monetary incentive for the projects that create these tokens, right? So generally the structure is there is a project developer. This project creates positive outcomes. Somebody certifies these outcomes, transforms them into tokens, and these tokens are monetized, sold essentially, right? So the point that I wanted to make is that what we have to see in the future, as Lucia was saying, as we transition toward more like local system, regional systems or something like that, the idea is that this tradability of the token should be limited to the region. It should be limited to the context. So who can buy these tokens, right? So for example, in the presentation, I made the hypothesis that you take part of the taxes that people pay locally, and they pay these taxes on the traditional economy. So whenever they make money, they pay taxes. If part of these taxes are used to purchase local tokens, right? So for example, tokens that represent a local impact, not a general impact, not carbon sequestration, for example, right? But rather, for example, the regeneration of certain places or providing care services where market failures are impeding that. So essentially, what do you generate? You generate some sort of forcing function of the system instead of just asking people to be P&L positive, so to essentially be able to exist in the market, paying the bills and doing their services. You can complement, let's say, the commercial viability of the service with some sort of local regeneration liability. So imagine that, for example, you run these services, and for each of the euros that you get from the social care services they provide, you receive one of these tokens, right? So the idea is, in this case, would be to transform the taxes part of the taxes that are paid locally into subsidies for these types of economies. That's just one hypothesis. Of course, the best would be in a system if you can actually have, again, local stakeholders that are maybe not just the government, but local stakeholders that are actually interested to purchase these tokens. We have to create these different economies, and we have to be creative with that, because otherwise, if we do not question the value system, right? If we don't question the perception of value, and we just accept, let's say, the perception of value that is provided by market viability, we're never going to have, I mean, you can still be strategic, you can still look at the systems and see what are the pieces that are lacking, and maybe the public government can jump in and create, like in the case of ONDC, this sometimes it's not even about spending money, it's just about creating common languages, it's about creating digital infrastructures that are largely, I would say, no, I don't want to say free, but very cheap to build. But I mean, the major outcomes can be generated if we really reconstruct the new theories of value and we create ways for, imposing different value elements into the system, which is not just market viability. So I think this is the question. And Roger has a question on big government versus bottom-up world. And I think this is exactly what we are saying here. What we are saying is that bottom-up means that you have to reconstruct a bottom-up theory of value. So you have to close the loop so that in the closed system, you can have an emergent conversation around value. You can think of as a local system, as a closed loop system, what is our definition of value, right? So for example, when you have these cooperative models that, I don't know, generate, for example, education services or food distribution, the value that you give to locally run, for example, education system, it can be much, much bigger than the value that you give to a public option or a traditionally private option, which is more like market value, right? So that's really something we have to invent, and the interesting thing is that it's really a responsibility of the system to define the theory of value. It cannot be administered by someone. It cannot be a standard theory of value. It needs to be created locally. So my answer would be, in a bottom-up world, things can work if we also take the responsibility to recreate or define our systems of value, right?
Yeah, and I think that in the case, for example, of all these kind of organizations like Incose, like public governments, so I think that we need to start to think about what is our role in society, and how we can use the force of networks in order really, because at the end, all of them are networks or are platforms in reality. They are platforms, but maybe they are not acting formally as a platform, right? Because, for example, in the case of local governments that I have been working with them in projects as well, so they need to start. So they are starting now to think about the citizen as a super stakeholder, as a stakeholder that they need to take into account. So now they are starting now to think about that, So it's like a wow, but it's like yeah. So I mean, they need to rethink their role in society. What is the governments in general, public institutions in general? What are their roles in society? How they can serve at the end? Because it's not a question of creating or being relevant or whatever. It's a question of that the citizens, the town, the bottom up is organizing themselves. And we have the technology in order to organize among ourselves. So they need to do it in order to survive, just to survive. So, and the company is the same. Companies in general the same, because it's gonna be like that. So it's gonna be more personalized. It's gonna be more so products that so standardization, it's over a long time ago, but more and more is gonna be over because technology is giving this possibility of personalization of solution, contextualize it, and so on. So this is, for me, the most important thing that companies in general needs to shift in their minds, to integrate this holistic, this ecosystem perspective, and how they can design for relationships and so on. So regeneration is basically inspiring in how nature works, and it's super interesting, because at the end it's how platforms are being replicated in the last years.
Roger, or to speak it
Yep.
has a question. You can speak.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm loving the movement that is taking place to create importance for the, if you want, everyday citizen in local governments. And that's happening. I'm in North America. I'm in Western Canada. And by the way, thank you for holding this at a time when I don't have to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning. So all over the world, there are these initiatives taking place to, if you like, have citizen-led democracy at a local level. My thing is at a, if you like, a national level, and in the US, for example, the national government systems are so far removed from anything remotely approaching citizen-led or even municipality-led, or because it's party-led and money-led over here. So my question is, I'm trying to do something about that, and I'm about to launch something. And could I have a conversation with Boundaryless, because there are lots of elements, and it is way more difficult than a local situation in some respects, but it's a way easier in some other respects because our governance systems over here are so terrible that I have an approach to change that, but I'd like to talk to somebody. I'm sorry, this is kind of a self-promotional piece on my part. But I'd like to say, Simone, I've been on the mailing list for years. So as they say in radio, long time listener, first time caller. I'd really, could I send you some stuff and we
Sure,
open
sure.
the
Please,
conversation?
please. I mean, like I said to Victor as well, please send it over to our email and we'll do our best. I know we always do our best to help our adopters, but that's what we work for. So for as much as we can, we try to help with guidance or suggestions, links, whatever.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'll stop self-promoting now.
It's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe some final question. Otherwise, I would thank you very much for your attention, and also for the people who will rewatch this in a later time. Please, if you are inspired by this, please reach out either to the address of Simone at hello@boundaryless.io or via Incose. It doesn't matter. It will come to them, to Lucia and Simone. Well, thank you indeed for this very insightful talk. It's so much more than just staring at the, let's say, template, so to speak. You bring it really alive and inspiring me also, and also the others, to keep using it. So for this, I want to thank also the audience and for your attention. And well, if Lucia and Simone can hang around a bit, we can have a small feedback on what we've heard and what we're going to do. Thank you. And I will stop
Thank
the
you so much.
recording now. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.